The mistake that changed Lillian Brooks's life did not begin with a scream. It began with rain, with one quiet man at the door, and with a waitress whose heart was too tired to be brave but too kind to stay silent. Downtown Chicago drowned beneath a Friday night storm, the streets shining black beneath neon lights, the sky splitting open over towers of glass and steel. Inside the Crown Room, every table was filled, every crystal glass caught gold from the chandeliers, and every rich laugh seemed to rise above the sound of thunder. It was the kind of restaurant where power wore silk, loyalty was bought with handshakes, and one wrong whisper could ruin a man before dessert. Lillian Brooks moved through it all with aching feet and a heart pounding beneath her white blouse. At 25 she had learned how to smile while fear sat inside her ribs. Tonight was her second shift in a row, but she could not stop. Her younger brother needed heart surgery, and every tip, every extra hour, every swallowed insult was another inch closer to keeping him alive. She told herself she was tired, not broken. She told herself she would survive the night. Then the front door opened. A man stepped in from the rain wearing an old leather jacket, dark jeans and no visible sign of wealth. Water clung to his black hair. His face was calm, almost too calm, with eyes that did not ask for attention because they already owned the room without needing it. He approached the host's stand and asked for a table with complete politeness. Trevor Miles, the new assistant manager, looked him up and down like he had dragged mud across the marble. Trevor loved control more than service, and tonight, surrounded by wealthy guests, he saw an easy target. His smile turned thin. His voice carried just enough for nearby tables to hear as he told the stranger that the Crown Room had standards. A few guests laughed. Softly at first, then louder. Lillian froze near the service station, a tray balanced in her hands. Shame burned through her chest, not for herself, but for the quiet man standing alone beneath the chandelier light. She wanted to speak. She wanted to say that hunger did not wear designer labels, that dignity did not need a reservation, that no one deserved to be mocked for looking ordinary. But Trevor controlled her schedule. Trevor controlled her job. And right now, her brother's surgery controlled her silence. The stranger did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply nodded once, thanked them and turned toward the door. That was when something inside Lillian cracked. She waited until Trevor disappeared toward the wine room, then grabbed the packed dinner she had saved for herself. Chicken, bread, and a small slice of cake wrapped in foil. She slipped through the side exit into the rain, her breath catching as cold air hit her face. "Sir," she called. The man stopped beneath the awning. Lillian held out the food with trembling hands. "It isn't much, but it's warm. No one should leave hungry." For the first time his expression shifted. Not surprise exactly. Something deeper. Something dangerous becoming still. His gaze dropped to the meal, then returned to her face, close and unreadable. "You're giving me your dinner?" he asked quietly. She nodded, embarrassed by how small it seemed. "You looked like you needed somewhere safe for a minute." A strange silence settled between them. The rain softened. The city seemed to hold its breath. He accepted the food with care, as if she had handed him something sacred. "What's your name?" "Lillian Brooks." His eyes darkened with a kind of promise she did not understand. "Lillian," he repeated, almost like the word had become mine. She stepped back, nervous now, her heart pounding harder. What she did not know was that the man in the old leather jacket was Damian Knight, the anonymous owner of the Crown Room, the hidden king behind America's most feared mafia empire. He was a man built from power, danger, and silence. A man who could protect or destroy with a single phone call. A man whose enemies feared betrayal more than war. And tonight, in the rain, Lillian had rejected his world's cruelty without knowing she had just touched its throne. Behind her, headlights flooded the street. One black armored SUV stopped. Then another. Then 6 more. The restaurant windows filled with terrified faces as the convoy surrounded the Crown Room. Damien looked past Lillian toward the doors, his voice dropping into a lethal whisper. "Now," he said, "let me return the favor." The convoy remained outside the Crown Room for less than 2 minutes, yet those 120 seconds changed the future of everyone inside. Customers watched through rain-covered windows as disciplined men in black suits stepped out of the armored SUVs with quiet precision. They never entered the restaurant. They simply opened the rear passenger door of the lead vehicle and waited. The same man who had been refused a table moments earlier folded the packed dinner carefully beneath his arm, gave one final glance toward the restaurant where Lillian still stood frozen behind the glass, and calmly entered the waiting vehicle. Within seconds, the convoy disappeared into the Chicago night, leaving behind nothing but confusion, fear, and unanswered questions. Trevor laughed as he straightened his expensive tie. He proudly announced that people often stage dramatic scenes to gain sympathy from luxury restaurants and congratulated himself for protecting the Crown Room's reputation. Several wealthy guests nodded in agreement, believing they had witnessed nothing more than a desperate stranger being removed with dignity. Trevor smiled with complete confidence, convinced his judgment had demonstrated strong leadership and absolute control. He had no idea that every decision made during the last 15 minutes had already been recorded, reviewed, and silently archived. Inside the moving SUV, the atmosphere was completely different. No one spoke unless necessary. Damien Knight removed the old leather jacket and placed it beside him. Beneath the worn clothing sat a perfectly tailored black suit that reflected the quiet elegance of a man accustomed to limitless power. His appearance transformed instantly. The ordinary customer vanished, replaced by the hidden king whose name was spoken only in careful whispers across America's criminal underworld and corporate boardrooms alike. To the public, Damien Knight was celebrated as a billionaire hospitality investor who owned one of the fastest-growing luxury restaurant groups in the country. Financial magazines praised his business instincts while television analysts admired his ability to restore struggling hotels and fine dining brands. Very few people knew the truth. Behind those successful corporations stood an empire built on information, influence, and absolute loyalty. Damien never ruled through loud threats. He ruled because everyone understood that he already knew the truth before anyone else did. That was exactly why he visited his own businesses disguised as an ordinary guest. Damien believed expensive reports could be manipulated. Managers could rehearse inspections. Executives could hide problems behind polished presentations. But ordinary employees revealed their true character only when they believed nobody important was watching. Kindness could not be rehearsed. Loyalty could not be purchased. Respect could not be demanded. It had to appear naturally when there was nothing to gain. Tonight had confirmed everything he needed to know. Trevor had protected appearances instead of people. Lillian Brooks had sacrificed her own dinner for a stranger she believed she would never meet again. As the convoy entered downtown headquarters through a private underground entrance, Damien's executive security team was already waiting. Without raising his voice, he instructed the compliance division to begin a confidential review of every detail connected to the Crown Room. Employee conduct reports, customer complaints, financial records, management decisions, payroll documentation, supplier contracts, and surveillance footage were all ordered for immediate examination. No announcement would be made. No warning would be given. Damien preferred quiet investigations because truth always revealed itself when people believed they were safe. Across the city, Lillian walked home beneath the fading rain with a heavy heart. The image of the quiet stranger accepting her dinner refused to leave her mind. She replayed Trevor's angry expression again and again, wondering whether helping someone had been the mistake that would cost her everything. She could not afford unemployment. Her brother's surgery depended on every paycheck. The fear settled deeper into her chest with every step until even breathing felt difficult. She had acted from compassion, yet now she questioned whether kindness had become a luxury she could no longer afford. The following morning, before sunrise touched the Chicago skyline, encrypted files began arriving on Damien Knight's private desk. Most contained routine findings from the overnight investigation. One report, however, was marked with the highest security classification. Damien opened it silently. His eyes narrowed. Someone inside his own luxury restaurant chain had been secretly laundering millions of dollars through false vendor accounts for months. The betrayal had not come from outside his empire. It had come from someone already standing inside it. Damien Knight spent the next 48 hours behind the sealed doors of Knight International headquarters, where every report uncovered another hidden layer of deception. What had first appeared to be simple financial fraud quickly expanded into something far more dangerous. Millions of dollars had been quietly washed through several luxury restaurants across the country using fake suppliers, fabricated catering invoices, and shell corporations that existed only on paper. The operation stretched beyond state lines and reached international accounts controlled by Damien's oldest rivals. Someone had been using his own hospitality empire to finance a silent mafia war without his knowledge. The investigation soon revealed the weakest link. Trevor Miles was never simply an arrogant assistant manager. He had been carefully planted years earlier by a rival syndicate, earning promotions while quietly manipulating vendor contracts and directing illegal transactions through trusted employees who believed they were processing ordinary paperwork. Trevor had hidden behind polished manners and expensive suits, but his true loyalty belonged elsewhere. Damien remained perfectly calm as the evidence unfolded. Anger clouded judgment. Control revealed truth. Then another report arrived. Security analysts had reconstructed every second from the Crown Room's surveillance footage. During the same evening, Trevor humiliated the man in the leather jacket. A discreet financial exchange had taken place inside a private dining room. One envelope had changed hands. One coded ledger had briefly appeared before disappearing again. Most customers never looked twice. But Lillian Brooks had. She had paused while serving coffee, glanced naturally toward the table, and unknowingly witnessed the faces of two men who should never have been connected. She remembered neither names nor details, yet her memory alone made her a dangerous witness. She had seen enough to identify people if questions were ever asked. Unfortunately, Damien's enemies reached the same conclusion. 3 nights later, Lillian finished another exhausting shift long after the restaurant closed. The streets were quieter than usual as she walked toward the train station carrying her worn backpack. The city lights reflected across damp sidewalks while a cold wind slipped between the buildings. At first, she dismissed the uneasy feeling creeping through her chest. Then she heard footsteps matching her pace. She turned. No one. She continued walking. Again the footsteps returned. Her breath became uneven as fear quietly settled into her thoughts. Every storefront window reflected movement just far enough behind her to remain uncertain. She convinced herself she was imagining everything, yet the feeling refused to disappear. Whoever was following never came close enough to speak. They simply remained there, hidden inside the city's shadows. Unknown to Lillian, Damien had already deployed 4 elite security specialists to protect her without revealing their presence. They rotated positions throughout the evening, blending naturally into pedestrians, delivery drivers, and waiting taxis. Their instructions were simple. Lillian Brooks was to remain safe at all costs without ever learning they existed. For 2 more days the invisible pursuit continued. Lillian barely slept. She checked over her shoulder every few steps. Even inside her apartment, every sound outside the hallway made her heart pounding. She began wondering whether Trevor had somehow blamed her for the stranger's complaint. She never imagined she had unknowingly walked into the center of a criminal conflict far larger than herself. Late Friday evening, while taking a shortcut through a quiet public plaza after work, the feeling returned stronger than ever. This time several dark figures slowly closed the distance from different directions. None spoke above a low whisper, yet their coordinated movements erased every possible exit without causing public alarm. The ordinary sounds of the city suddenly felt distant. Before panic could consume her completely, another familiar figure stepped from the opposite side of the plaza. It was the quiet businessman she had fed in the rain. Damien walked toward her with remarkable calm, as though he had expected to find her there all along. Without explanation, he positioned himself beside her and gently guided her toward a waiting black sedan parked beneath bright streetlights. "You should not walk alone this late," he said softly. Something about his voice settled the storm inside her. She did not understand why, but standing beside him made the fear loosen its grip. For the first time in days she felt genuinely safe. During the drive they spoke about ordinary things: her brother's recovery, long work shifts, favorite coffee shops, and Chicago's endless rain. Damien listened far more than he talked. Trust formed quietly between them, not through promises or romance, but through the comforting certainty that somehow he always appeared exactly when she needed help. When the car stopped outside her apartment building, Lillian thanked him warmly before stepping out. As she turned back to wave goodbye, the interior light briefly illuminated the vehicle. Her smile disappeared. Resting beneath Damien's suit jacket was a holstered handgun. For one frozen moment their eyes met. Only then did Lillian realize the kind businessman she trusted had been hiding a life filled with unimaginable danger. After discovering the weapon beneath Damien's jacket, Lillian spent the entire weekend trying to convince herself she had misunderstood what she saw. Chicago was full of successful businessmen who employed licensed security or carried protection because of their wealth. That explanation sounded reasonable enough to quiet her thoughts, yet every time she remembered the calm expression on Damien's face, something felt different. He carried himself with a quiet control that could not be purchased with money alone. There was hidden power behind his silence, but she could not define it. Damien, meanwhile, realized he could no longer allow their friendship to survive on half-truths. Meeting her one evening in a peaceful botanical garden overlooking the city skyline, he decided to reveal only the part of his life that would answer her growing questions without exposing the dangerous world he ruled. Sitting across from her beneath the fading sunset, he admitted that he owned one of the country's largest hospitality investment companies. Hundreds of luxury hotels, restaurants, and resorts operated under corporations that ultimately answered to him. The scale of his business empire left Lillian speechless. She looked at him for several long moments before quietly laughing. "So, you're telling me the man I offered my packed dinner to actually owns restaurants all over America?" Damien nodded with an almost embarrassed smile. "I suppose life has an unusual sense of humor." Lillian shook her head in disbelief, but there was no greed in her eyes. No excitement. No calculation. She simply accepted the truth as another unexpected chapter in an already confusing story. That reaction fascinated Damien more than any business negotiation ever had. Most people looked at him and imagined wealth first. Lillian still looked at the man who had accepted a simple homemade meal in the rain. Over the following weeks, expensive bouquets, designer handbags, luxury watches, and exclusive invitations quietly arrived at her apartment through anonymous deliveries. Every single package was returned unopened. Damien soon learned why. "I don't need any of this," Lillian explained gently when they met again. "If someone really wants to help me, I'd rather my little brother gets healthy. That's worth more than diamonds." Those words settled deeply inside Damien's heart. For years he had watched people compete for pieces of his fortune. Investors chased his approval. Politicians sought his influence. Rivals feared his power. Yet the woman standing before him wanted none of it. Her loyalty belonged entirely to her family. She measured success by hospital visits instead of bank accounts. Without telling anyone, Damien made one confidential phone call. The following morning, the hospital administration received anonymous authorization covering every remaining expense for Lillian's younger brother's surgery, rehabilitation, medication, and future treatment. Strict legal instructions accompanied the payment. The donor's identity would never be revealed under any circumstances. 2 days later, Lillian arrived at the billing office expecting another impossible payment schedule. Instead, the receptionist smiled warmly. "Everything has already been taken care of." Lillian blinked in confusion. "There must be some mistake." "There isn't. Your brother's treatment is fully approved." Walking out of the hospital, her heart pounding, she struggled to understand what had happened. This was not the first impossible coincidence. The frightening strangers had disappeared. Her apartment building suddenly had new overnight security. Anonymous grocery deliveries occasionally appeared outside her door. Even her brother's doctors seemed unusually attentive. Someone remained close enough to protect her life while carefully hiding in the background. She began wondering whether the mysterious businessman somehow knew more than he admitted. Their friendship slowly deepened through ordinary moments instead of grand declarations. They shared quiet dinners at modest cafes rather than luxury restaurants. Damien listened as she spoke about childhood memories, nursing dreams she had postponed, and the fear of losing the only family she had left. Around him, Lillian discovered an unexpected feeling of being safe. Around her, Damien experienced something unfamiliar, a peaceful life untouched by strategy, negotiations, or endless responsibility. For the first time in many years, the king of a hidden empire imagined a future that did not revolve around constant danger. That hope lasted only until dawn 3 days later. One of Damien's encrypted emergency phones vibrated across his desk. His chief intelligence officer spoke only one sentence before the line fell silent. "The rival family has made its move." Across the city, Lillian reached the hospital and found her brother's room empty. The bed was untouched. The nurse on duty had vanished. Only one folded card rested on the pillow. It contained no signature. Only 6 chilling words. "The king must pay for loyalty." The empty hospital room shattered the fragile peace Damien had been trying to build. Within minutes, every secure communication channel inside his organization came alive. Luxury hotels, private offices, shipping terminals, and executive boardrooms transformed into silent command centers as encrypted reports poured into headquarters. The disappearance of Lillian's younger brother was not a random kidnapping. It was a calculated message aimed directly at the heart of Damien's empire. Whoever orchestrated it understood one terrifying truth. They did not need to attack the king. They only needed to threaten the people he had chosen to protect. Damien stood inside the operations room, surrounded by glowing digital maps and intelligence screens. His expression never changed, but the silence around him grew heavier with every passing second. Then the final investigation report arrived. The betrayal had come from inside. Vincent Hale, one of Damien's oldest underbosses and a man trusted for nearly 12 years, had secretly maintained contact with the rival syndicate. While publicly defending Damien's interests, Vincent had quietly sold confidential employee files, financial movements, and personal identities in exchange for promises of future influence. The most valuable information he delivered was Lillian Brooks. Her routines, apartment address, hospital visits, and even her younger brother's medical records had all been handed to the enemy weeks earlier. The room fell completely silent. No one dared speak. No one dared even breathe too loudly. Damien slowly closed the report before placing both hands on the conference table. Betrayal always carried greater danger than any outside enemy because it destroyed loyalty from within. The Empire had survived competitors, investigations, and financial attacks, but betrayal hidden beneath trusted faces threatened its very foundation. Without raising his voice, Damien began issuing orders. Every international account connected to Vincent Hale was frozen. Internal access codes changed immediately. Trusted commanders quietly secured every division without creating public panic. No reckless decisions. No emotional reactions. Only absolute control. If war had become unavoidable, Damien intended to ensure innocent people never paid the price. Across the city, Lillian found herself inside a luxurious but heavily guarded estate. Nothing resembled a prison except the locked exits and constant supervision. Her younger brother received proper medical attention, comfortable clothes, and warm meals. That confused her more than anything else. Whoever controlled this place clearly wanted leverage, not suffering. Fear still lived inside her, but it no longer controlled her decisions. Instead of giving in to panic, Lillian observed everything. She memorized faces. She counted footsteps outside every hallway. She noticed delivery schedules, changing security rotations, and overheard conversations drifting through partially opened office doors. The men guarding the estate believed she was frightened enough to ignore details. They underestimated her completely. Every evening, she quietly repeated names, addresses, meeting times, and coded phrases inside her mind until they became impossible to forget. She listened whenever rival executives argued about stolen accounts, hidden warehouses, or damaged business routes. She learned which leaders trusted each other and which secretly questioned their own alliances. Every small detail became another piece of intelligence. She was not a victim. She became the most valuable observer inside enemy territory. Meanwhile, Damien received fragments of information from hidden surveillance assets already operating near the estate. Their reports confirmed something extraordinary. Lillian isn't breaking, one intelligence officer explained. She's learning. For the first time since the crisis began, Damien allowed himself the smallest hint of admiration. He had always respected her kindness, but now he witnessed another side of her character. Beneath her gentle heart stood remarkable courage. She refused to surrender her mind even when surrounded by uncertainty. That quiet strength reminded Damien why true power never needed loud displays. Late that evening, encrypted information from one of Damien's undercover agents reached headquarters. The agent had intercepted part of a conversation held inside the estate. The rival syndicate planned to relocate Lillian's brother before sunrise. Waiting any longer meant losing their only reliable location. Damien looked around the operations room where dozens of loyal commanders stood prepared for full-scale war. Every one of them waited for his signal to deploy hundreds of highly trained personnel. Instead, Damien removed his suit jacket, secured a single concealed weapon beneath his shoulder holster, and quietly walked toward the exit. His underboss stepped forward in disbelief. "You cannot go there alone." Damien paused without turning around. "If this empire still deserves loyalty," he said calmly, "then its king must be willing to stand alone first." The doors closed behind him. For the first time in years, Damien Knight entered enemy headquarters with no army, no convoy, and no guarantee he would ever walk back out. Knight settled heavily over the abandoned riverside warehouse where the rival syndicate had established its temporary command center. From the outside, the building looked forgotten, but Damien's intelligence network had already mapped every entrance, surveillance blind spot, and emergency exit. His decision to walk inside alone had never been an act of recklessness. It was a calculated move designed to keep attention focused entirely on him while his most trusted soldiers quietly positioned themselves around the surrounding blocks. Every second brought another opportunity to protect innocent lives before the conflict consumed them. Inside, Damien moved through the dim corridors with remarkable calm. He greeted every obstacle with quiet confidence instead of unnecessary aggression. Doors opened through carefully prepared security codes gathered by his intelligence division. Conversations ended the moment he appeared. His reputation traveled ahead of him like an invisible storm. Men who had once mocked his influence now hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances instead of confident smiles. The king had entered enemy territory alone, and somehow that frightened them more than an army ever could. Meanwhile, Lillian noticed unusual movement outside the room where she and several frightened civilians were being held. Guards abandoned their normal positions. Urgent messages echoed through nearby hallways. She realized something important was happening. Using everything she had memorized during captivity, she quietly guided the frightened captives toward an overlooked maintenance passage she had discovered earlier while observing the daily routines. She spoke softly, encouraging everyone to remain calm. Fear spread quickly, but courage spread faster when someone chose to lead. One elderly woman hesitated, terrified they would never make it outside. Lillian gently squeezed her hand. "We stay close," she whispered. "Nobody gets left behind." Those simple words transformed panic into purpose. One by one, the captives slipped through the narrow passage toward a service exit that had briefly been left unguarded. They were not running in chaos anymore. They were moving together with hope. For the first time since arriving, Lillian understood that protecting others gave her strength greater than fear itself. At the center of the warehouse, Damien finally reached the executive conference room where rival leaders had gathered. Instead of panic, they welcomed him with quiet confidence, believing they still controlled every advantage. Their leader calmly offered negotiations disguised as peace while secretly waiting for betrayal to unfold from within Damien's own ranks. Lillian, following distant voices through another corridor, suddenly recognized one of them. Vincent Hale. The traitorous underboss had secretly entered the warehouse minutes earlier through a concealed elevator. Hidden behind a decorative wall panel, he prepared to activate an emergency security lockdown that would trap Damien inside. Without stopping to question herself, Lillian rushed toward the conference hall. "Damien," she shouted. Her voice echoed through the building. Every head turned. Vincent froze for a single fatal moment. Damien followed Lillian's warning, immediately recognizing the hidden control console Vincent had reached toward. The entire deception became clear before the betrayal could succeed. Loyal soldiers waiting outside instantly intercepted the remaining escape routes, preventing the rival leadership from disappearing into the underground tunnel network. Silence filled the room. Not because of victory. Because everyone realized a waitress had uncovered what experienced operatives had almost missed. When Damien's men finally secured the building, their eyes no longer saw Lillian as an ordinary civilian. They saw someone who had remained calm under impossible pressure, protected strangers before herself, and saved their leader through intelligence instead of force. Respect spread naturally through the ranks. No speeches were necessary. Outside, as dawn slowly painted the Chicago skyline, Damien found Lillian standing beside her younger brother, who had finally been reunited with her. Exhaustion covered her face, yet relief softened every breath she took. "There is something you deserve to know," Damien said quietly. She looked into his eyes without looking away. "I already know you're not only a businessman." Damien gave a small nod. "I lead the organization people fear. Everything they call an empire belongs to me." The words settled between them. Lillian remained silent for several moments. Then she stepped closer. She did not see the terrifying stories whispered across America. She saw the man who had secretly paid for her brother's surgery, protected innocent people, honored loyalty, and risked everything to keep his promise. "You never used your power to make me belong to you," she said softly. "You only tried to keep us safe." Damien's expression finally softened. "You were never a possession." His voice dropped into a quiet whisper. "But your safety has always been mine to protect." At that moment, Lillian understood something even more important. She became powerful. Not because she ruled an empire, but because she refused to let fear decide who she would become. Far away, inside another hidden command center, the defeated rival mafia boss received news of the warehouse's failure. He slowly folded the report, smiled without warmth, and issued a single order that would shake the entire underworld. "The time for shadows is over. Declare all-out war against Damien Knight's empire." The declaration of war spread through America's underworld faster than any newspaper headline. Within 48 hours, luxury hotels, shipping companies, logistics firms, financial institutions, and restaurant chains connected to Damien Knight's business interests became targets of coordinated sabotage. Rival organizations believed they could weaken the empire by attacking its commercial foundation instead of its leadership. Major cities, from Chicago to New York and Boston, felt the pressure as hidden alliances shifted overnight. Investors panicked, executives questioned their partners, and rumors traveled through boardrooms in frightened whispers. Everyone expected the king to answer with revenge. Damien chose strategy instead. Inside his headquarters, every response focused on protecting innocent employees, customers, and legitimate businesses. Restaurants remained open under increased security. Hotel guests were quietly relocated whenever intelligence suggested possible threats. Financial investigators worked beside legal advisors rather than armed enforcers. Damien understood that true power was measured by how many lives could be protected during chaos, not by how much fear a leader could create. Every decision reflected control instead of anger, earning even greater loyalty from those who served beside him. Lillian refused to remain hidden while others carried the burden. During her captivity, she had memorized dozens of company names, offshore account numbers, coded conversations, and delivery schedules that had seemed meaningless at the time. Now those scattered memories became priceless evidence. Working closely with Damien's financial analysts, she patiently reconstructed the rival syndicate's laundering network. Piece by piece, hidden corporations were connected to fraudulent charities, fake investment firms, and international shell companies that had secretly financed criminal operations for years. The discoveries changed everything. Instead of chasing individual leaders across cities, Damien's organization quietly dismantled the enemy's financial foundation through lawful investigations, frozen assets, confidential witnesses, and corporate audits. Every document Lillian remembered became another crack inside the rival empire. The enemy had prepared for armed confrontation but never expected a waitress's memory to become their greatest weakness. News of the investigation eventually reached Trevor Miles. No longer protected by false identities or hidden accounts, Trevor sat alone inside a federal interview room reviewing the evidence against him. For the first time since this nightmare began, the confidence that had once fueled his arrogance completely disappeared. He finally understood that his greed had reached far beyond stolen money. His choices had endangered honest workers, frightened innocent families, and nearly destroyed the future of the woman he had dismissed so carelessly. Looking down at his trembling hands, Trevor realized that betrayal never remained profitable forever. Days later, coordinated legal operations unfolded across multiple states. Financial records were seized, corrupt executives were arrested, illegal companies collapsed, and international banking authorities cooperated with investigators. Damien's rivals discovered too late that the strongest walls inside an empire were built with trust, not fear. Their influence dissolved as allies abandoned them, unwilling to sacrifice themselves for leaders who valued wealth above loyalty. When the conflict finally ended, Damien stood before the senior members of his organization inside the Grand Conference Hall overlooking Chicago. Every commander present had witnessed Lillian's courage, compassion, and determination from the beginning. They had watched her protect strangers, uncover hidden intelligence, expose betrayal, and remain honest despite standing beside unimaginable power. Without formal ceremony, the room slowly filled with respectful applause. It was not offered because Damien cared for her. It was offered because she had earned it. One by one, veteran commanders approached Lillian with quiet respect, acknowledging that she had become part of the family they had spent decades protecting. No title was necessary. No oath was demanded. Loyalty had already chosen her. Several older advisors smiled as they exchanged knowing glances. The king finally found someone worthy to stand beside him, one murmured. Another answered with quiet certainty. Every great empire needs a queen whose strength comes from character, not fear. Lillian lowered her eyes, humbled by their trust. She had never imagined that the frightened waitress who once offered her own dinner to a lonely stranger would one day help save thousands of honest livelihoods. She understood now that courage often began with one small act of kindness. As peace slowly returned, Damien invited Lillian back to the crown room after closing hours. The restaurant looked exactly as it had on that rainy Friday night, yet everything felt different. He stood beside the same entrance where she had first seen him wearing an old leather jacket. She smiled softly. "I've always wondered something." Damien looked toward the rain falling beyond the windows. "So have I." He took a slow breath before speaking. "There is a reason I came here alone that night, and it's time you finally learned why." Spring arrived in Chicago with gentle rain instead of storms, and for the first time in many months, the city breathed without the shadow of hidden fear. The financial investigations had dismantled the rival syndicate's operations, their leaders faced justice through the courts, and the businesses once trapped inside corruption slowly recovered. The long war that had threatened countless innocent lives ended not with revenge, but with accountability. Damien's empire stood stronger than before because its foundation had been rebuilt upon trust rather than intimidation. Betrayal had nearly destroyed everything, yet loyalty had saved what power alone never could. One quiet Monday morning, every employee of the Crown Room received an invitation to a mandatory company gathering. Managers, chefs, servers, hosts, cleaners, and executives filled the elegant dining hall, whispering among themselves as cameras from the corporate communications team quietly prepared for an important announcement. Nobody knew why the anonymous owner, who had remained invisible for years, had suddenly requested a personal appearance. Then the ballroom doors opened. Damien Knight walked inside wearing the same old leather jacket he had worn on that unforgettable rainy night. Silence instantly filled the room. Every employee recognized it. Every face remembered the stranger they had judged by his appearance. Trevor Miles, escorted into the meeting under company investigation, lowered his eyes as realization settled across the room. The quiet customer he had insulted had always been the owner himself. His arrogance, dishonesty, and role in the financial conspiracy had cost him everything. Damien offered no public humiliation, no harsh speech, and no celebration of Trevor's downfall. Justice required dignity. Trevor's employment was permanently terminated, and his criminal actions remained in the hands of lawful authorities. Even after betrayal, Damien refused to let anger become his form of control. Damien then stepped onto the stage and looked toward Lillian. Months earlier she had stood inside the same restaurant worried she might lose her job for offering a packed dinner to a hungry stranger. Today she stood surrounded by hundreds of colleagues whose lives had changed because of one simple act of compassion. "Lillian Brooks," Damien said warmly, "you reminded this company why it exists." He announced her promotion as Executive Hospitality Director for every restaurant across the Knight hospitality empire. Her responsibility would not simply involve operations or customer service. She would shape the culture of every location, ensuring that kindness remained the company's greatest standard. Applause echoed throughout the hall as employees rose to their feet. No one questioned the decision. She had earned every ounce of their respect. Damien then unveiled a new company-wide policy that would hang inside every restaurant, hotel, and resort his organization owned. "Every guest deserves dignity regardless of appearance." The words were simple. Their meaning transformed an entire empire. Months passed peacefully. Lillian's younger brother completed his treatment successfully and returned home healthy, carrying dreams that illness had almost stolen from him. Watching him laugh again became the greatest reward Lillian had ever known. She never discovered the anonymous payment until much later, and when Damien finally admitted the truth, she thanked him with tears rather than words. Some kindness could never truly be repaid. Their relationship continued to grow slowly, built not upon luxury or status, but upon quiet trust. Damien never tried to control her choices. Lillian never asked him to abandon the responsibilities he carried. Instead, they stood close through every challenge, protecting one another with honesty. Around Damien she always felt safe. Around Lillian, Damien discovered a peace no victory had ever given him. She was not a victim. She became powerful. Not because she possessed wealth, but because compassion had become the strongest influence inside the empire. Senior advisors often smiled when they watched them together. "The king finally found his queen," they would whisper. Not a queen crowned by diamonds. A queen crowned by unwavering loyalty. Nearly a year after that rainy Friday night, another exhausted traveler pushed open the doors of the Crown Room wearing worn boots and a weathered jacket. Conversations briefly paused as a few guests glanced toward the newcomer. Long ago, that moment might have ended in quiet judgment. Instead, Lillian herself walked to the entrance with a warm smile. "Welcome," she said gently. "We're happy you're here." The traveler's anxious breath slowed. The tension left his shoulders. Across the dining room, Damien watched silently, his heart pounding with quiet gratitude as their eyes met. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to, because they both understood the truth that had transformed an empire. True greatness never begins with fear. It begins with respect. And on that simple foundation, a king, a queen, and everyone who entered their doors finally found a place that felt like home.